Who wants to write a simple web framework in the NIM programming language? Yes, the NIM programming language from scratch. And the NIM, if you're not familiar with NIM, the programming language, well, let's take a look here really quick. NIM is a statically typed compiled systems programming language. It combines successful concepts from mature languages like Python, Ada, and Modula. Modula is a descendant of Pascal. Okay. Well, it turns out in order to write a simple web framework in NIM, you need to have a few things. Like, of course, you have to have NIM installed on your system. Then you need, it actually includes some HTTP libraries. So you don't even have to build the socket layer framework yourself. NIM comes pre-built and pre-packaged with this technology for us, which is fantastic. That means that we don't have to go all the way and write even more from scratch. We can just lean on just some of the buffering, and everything else is taken care of for us automatically. All we have to really worry about is sort of our business logic. What do we want in the web framework? So most web frameworks today, like you look at maybe like Express or Flask in Python, these have some sort of opinionated built-in techniques and parsers, so that way it makes it really easy for you to write routing systems, HTTP verbs, right? So you've got REST like post, put, patch, delete. Those kinds of HTTP verbs will be handled for you automatically in those frameworks. But when you're writing something from scratch, like with NIM and the basic HTTP server technology that comes pre-included, then you don't have any of that. So you have to write it yourself. So if we take a look here at what is from scratch, what is from scratch? What does that even mean? What does from scratch mean? Well, sometimes we're told, don't reinvent the wheel, right? We don't want to reinvent the wheel, because if you do, you're just actually kind of basically wasting time, and you might build something that's not really worthwhile. You'll build something that's not as good as maybe something that's been pre-written and is mature. So it may be right that when we want to write reliable and stable software, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We should rely on a mature framework instead, so that way we don't have to write our own framework. We just use that mature framework, and it will have been battle tested. So, however, here's the deal. Sometimes life is too boring. Makes sense. And if we don't challenge ourselves, we won't learn, right, how to actually build. How do the web frameworks work? And I like this little pun here, web frameworks. You don't know how the web frame works. We should write it by ourselves, because what you're going to get is you'll learn how it works, how these things work inherently. And so I see, and I remember, and I do, and I understand. This right here actually is I don't know where that quote comes from. I really don't. We probably should Google that really quick. Where does this quote come from? Quote. Is it a quote? Let's find out. What I hear, I forget. What I see, I don't know. No, it doesn't seem like it's a quote of any kind, but it is a quote from this author. I see and I remember. This is key when you're teaching yourself technology. You will not really get as much out of it unless you do, and then you understand. So you need to get your hands on the keyboard and actually typing, and then going through the paces, and then learning how it works and failing. And that triggers emotional responses, and then it deeply embeds itself in your memory, basically permanently. And that is the best way to learn, is that practice. Okay, so maybe you want to write your own web framework from scratch, kind of in scratch, because you don't want to go, well, you don't have to, you can really build it from scratch if you go all the way into writing your own hardware. You could build the silicon yourself, build your own computer, and then build your own networking stack and your own networking protocol. You don't have to go all the way to reinventing the semiconductor. It's a little much, and that really would truly be from scratch if you went down that path. So we can stand on the shoulders of giants in a way where we already have a computer in front of us. We have a compiler. We're using NIM. Let's write just the application logic in NIM directly. We don't need to write anything lower level. We don't need to go to TCP. We don't even need to go to HTTP. We can just use the existing libraries that have already been pre-built for us. And that's what we'll do. Regarding the article, we'll rely on other HTTP servers. So we're not going to write our own HTTP server. We're just going to use the HTTP server built into NIM, and that would allow us to write a web framework from scratch, essentially, bringing your own business logic on top of an HTTP server. And that's how you would do it, and that's how it would work. So what is a web framework? Well, it turns out a web framework is basically, for the most part, just business logic built on top of an HTTP server. And the HTTP server will handle all the connectivity, the client connectivity, the buffering, the HTTP headers, the general format of the protocol itself. Everything's taken care of for you from that perspective, and all you have to do is just sort of leverage the data that comes over the wire. So a web framework is also called a web application framework. You're mostly working in the application layer, sort of the business logic layer. It's built on top of an HTTP server, which is also built on, of course, top of the HTTP protocol itself. And generally, HTTP server is only used to accept requests from clients and then to respond to clients. And that's sort of where the HTTP server ends. So it's just there for it to handle the incoming request, ensuring all the data there is what you would need in order to process your business logic. And then it gives you a mechanism to reply back to the client based on the request from the client. So the web framework supplies more useful and powerful utilities such as data validation, user authentication. Oh yeah, of course, security. You need to have user security built in. For example, when you shop online, you click on a purchase button, and that purchase button, right, will probably have a bunch of cart items in the cart, and then you'll need to know who the user is, and your browser will send a request to the web server. When you click the button, the web server will parse the request into data structure, which the web framework can understand. The web framework will verify your identity and add this product into the database to send a request to deduct money from your credit card, and then it will, put the item into a manifest that will be done at a warehouse, so that way they can ship the item to you after your credit card has been debited. And so that's the whole idea of a web framework, is to sort of handle that level of business logic, set one step above the HTTP server layer. If you haven't installed NIM yet onto your computer, it's actually pretty straightforward. They give us some really easy steps to install in NIM onto your computer directly. Also, if you don't want to install the native NIM directly onto your system, you can use Docker and have it run in a Docker container, and then use the compiler in Docker then to compile files on your local host system. And that's another approach which actually works pretty well. Usually you kind of go into the install NIM. So you just go to nim-lang.org, install NIM, and then you scroll down to your platform of choice. So there's a Windows and a Mac option, and you can download the zips and then install with the executable on Mac and Linux. On Unix systems, there's this really nice curl command that makes it super easy. You just copy and paste this curl command, and then it will install NIM onto your system. And then you have NIM, and then you'll have the NIM compiler, and you can then write your own NIM code, and then compile your NIM code into an executable. There are so many programming languages out there. You would often ask yourself, why would you want to start expanding out and looking at other programming languages, especially newer ones where you might say, oh, I don't need that. Well, it turns out it's actually a pretty good idea to sometimes learn new programming languages. Keeps you up to date, keeps you in the loop of what's new. And NIM is a statically typed compiled systems programming language. It makes it really simple for you to write clean, intuitive syntax, and it has extra efficiencies built in. So for looking at what new language you might want to learn, NIM is a good option. It's efficient and expressive and elegant. Well, I mean, there's some fancy words there. Yeah, it kind of is. The syntax is a lot like Python, where it's clean and easy to understand. The outcome, however, is that NIM is more efficient and statically typed. So it's got like a couple extra bonuses on top of it. So the reasons to love NIM is because the syntax, elegant and clean, statically typed, and it's high performance because it's compiled. So we get extra bonuses from that perspective. And that's a really good reason why you should check out the NIM programming language. Now that we're building a web framework in NIM from scratch, we can leverage some of the built-in HTTP libraries that NIM provides for us. From the get-go, we don't have to install any extra dependencies. NIM comes pre-built with this library for us to use and leverage. As an HTTP server is asynchronous HTTP server too, which means that you'll be able to support high concurrency with a lot of connected devices, and you'll be able to concurrently serve a lot of devices, fully utilizing the entire CPU rather than just waiting on I/O, right? That's going to give you a lot more boost in performance, and you'll get more of the hardware that you purchase. NIM has a built-in asynchronous HTTP server called Async HTTP Server. That's a really simple, straightforward library name. You don't need to install it. You just import Async HTTP Server to use it. And so just like any other HTTP server, it helps us to transfer content like HTML and JSON and text between a client, usually a browser, like a web browser, or curl. Well, in this, yeah, it depends on, right? Or a mobile phone or an app, mobile app. The server from NIM will help parse the requests into sequences or tables, which is NIM data types that make it really easy for us to leverage the kind of data. So it like pre-parses all of the request data for us, so we can take care of the API calls and responding easily. So if we look, HTTP 200 is the status code, which tells the client that everything is okay. Hello world is typically the easiest possible way to build your first application. Usually it involves just printing something to standard output. So you will have a main function, and then you'll print to the standard out, and then you'll return. And that's the hello world application. And then we can build that with an HTTP server, so then you'll wrap that logic around HTTP. Instead of printing the standard out, you'll transmit the data to the connected remote client, which could be yourself. You could be your own self, so you could sort of ping pong against yourself. And then we will simply build it by running this code below, binding it on your local host and port 8080, so that way your browser can make an API call or an HTTP request essentially to this host and port. And then you should be able to get hello world on the screen. So if we just walk through this code here really quick, let's take a look. Actually, there is a better doc here that I like. It is the hello world example in the NIM language official documentation. It's actually pretty straightforward. If we take a look here, import async HTTP server and async dispatch. So you start by creating a variable called server, and then you'll assign it to new async HTTP server. Then we'll create a function called CB. What would CB be? What is CB? Callback, perhaps? Let's say it is callback. You get a request object, and then we have some. This is not my favorite. This is weird. Why would, look at this. I understand why they would do a syntax like this for sort of baking in asynchronous directly into the language. It's just weird. Could we have done this differently? Like maybe have an aproc, or it's just the syntax. It's just weird. It's just super weird. Here is we use await, which you might be familiar with, async await, and then you directly respond with an HTTP 200 status code and the string hello world. Then in the main area here, we wait for the server, and basically this says listen for incoming connections on port 8080 and send all the requests to my callback proc here, and then I can process all that data. So this will be the main entry point into our application. Let's try it out. Launch our own HTTP server using the NIM programming language and the example hello world. It's actually pretty simple. I like it. Only a few lines of code, and you'll have a running HTTP server that gives you basically full control to do whatever you want with this HTTP server. You get, let's just do hello world. This is code here that is on this article where we can just copy and paste it really easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste it. We'll compile it, and then we'll actually try using it. So this is the process of where we do some copy and pasting, and then the normal way to do programming, right? The way that we've used we're used to doing it. So let's actually give this a shot. Let's walk in here. I'm going to build a new, so I'm running a terminal on a Mac, so I'll be able to say pb paste into sort of like I'll just say it server.nim file. I'm pretty sure it's .nim, right? And we can open up that file. Here we go. This is everything that we wanted. Then we can simply run this. I do believe, well, obviously it's going to be a different file, so we'll do nim server, and then it should build and compile. Let's see. Okay, it's doing things. Things are happening. All right, I'm making an assumption here. The -r flag probably means to run, and what we have here is the nim compiler built the application, and then it ran the binary output. So I'm actually kind of curious. We should be able to start running curl against our HTTP server that we've got running locally. All right, and just to validate that, yep, okay, so we've got our binary here, which is 587 kilobytes in size, and it looks like it's already running, so we can split the screen here. We've got our server output here. I should be able to say curl HTTP ://localhost :8080 / and if I press enter, it should run hello world. All right, so now I've got this server that can return a hello world. The code is actually really simple and super streamlined. So this is our server.nim. Here we go. That's what it's doing. It's really that clean, really that simple. And it's giving us the server output. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We're just relying on the HTTP server from async HTTP server. Then we respond hello world 200. Now we can put a whole bunch of business logic in here, right? We can do a bunch of like extra stuff, business logic. Yep, logic here. Perfect. We can do what we want going forward. We've built and we have in our hands a fast and performant HTTP server written in nim that is easy to run and pretty straightforward. All right, say we wanted to add some basic routing logic in the form of the path, right? The / hello part of the URL. We can take that information and use it to determine what logic to run in our web application framework. Now it's going to be really straightforward and simple. To do that, all we have to do is capture here, for example. All right, so let's walk through it first before we go too deep into it. So a route, we can use a map URL corresponding to the proc, which responds to the client with the contents, which actually is kind of cool approach. You can sort of map the / hello, / home, or / whatever on the end of the URL there to then run a certain function. You can also do something even more simple. That is, in the case of a switch statement or a case statement, right? The example demonstrates a web framework executes some actions such as fetch info from a database, login, return HTML, could be JSON, whatever you're sort of looking based on the method of the HTTP. And there's various methods, right? So you've got a get method right here, we get. There's also a post, a put, a patch, delete, or whatever you want. You can basically, it's just text, right? You can put anything there that you want. There are some global variables here that define, though this is just a string, HTTP get is going to be get. Usually they're represented as in capital letters, so capital G, capital E, capital T for get. Same for the others, post, put, patch, delete. Then you have the server IP and the port, and then the path. And for example, you can send an email with / hello. Or / home could fetch data from a database. Really straightforward and simple. There is a find handler function here that they're sort of represented as pseudocode. It doesn't directly plug in, so you have to modify a bit if you want to use this approach for a case statement. You can, based on a get. So the structure is interesting. It's mostly, hey, we're just sort of walking through a way for you to do this. They're going to start out with a hierarchy here. So we're going to have a nested case statement. First, we're going to look at the HTTP method, and then we're going to say it's the get. So these are all the read paths. Even though we have the next case statement here, where we say / hello. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run echo, which is basically the print statement for nim. You're going to print out get. So it's just sort of like a placeholder. and this will be send email. And if you really wanted to send an email, then you can make an API call here to something like SendGrid or another API service provider, or you can do your very own SMTP logic as well, if so you wanted. You have to do a lot of extra security and signing and things like that. You might not want to do that yourself. Let me lock over here. We have /home, and this could be like getting data from a database or just returning, you know, the hello part of your website, just an introduction, things like that. Otherwise, discard. So we have a post here, and then the post, for example, could be a login, so email, password. Then you can also have a post home, which okay, it's just some random demo here. It kind of makes sense. So in order to plug this logic in to your HTTP server and your web framework, you just need to do a little bit of extra things. So you needed to import HTTP core, which is going to give you access to these variables here, which are just strings. So the fetch get. I wanted to return a string type, so I have got my variable here, and then in addition to echoing, which will be just basic output, sort of like logging your server log, I'll also return some text, for example. You would want to send the email. This is just a placeholder. Then you do the same here, and that's pretty straightforward. Then what we could do is capture the path from the request.url.path in our main server loop. Then we also want the HTTP method with the request method here from the request object. Then we can pipe that data into our find handler, the HTTP method and the path, and get sort of like the output. I'm just going to call this output or out. Let's just type that output. So this will be a string, right? And then I can just use that there. And then if I run this, so I just nim c-r server.nim, it'll compile my code, and then I can run an example here. So we'll go curl http local host host colon 8080 /hello. Now this, right, if I run this, it should run the hello path here, which is going to be, it's a get, right? And then we have /hello. It should send the email, even though we don't actually send an email right here. It's going to echo and log this line here, and it's going to return the string sent email. So let's try it. Let's run it. And it worked. It did what I wanted it to do. So it gave back to me some text saying sent email. And then also, as you saw down here, it logged some data, get hello. So the path and the verb. And that's how you would sort of get started writing your own web framework from scratch in the NIM programming language.